August 23, 1950. General Douglas MacArthur stands in his headquarters in Tokyo studying maps of Korea. The situation is catastrophic. The Pusan Perimeter is barely holding. North Korean forces are attacking from every direction. American and South Korean troops are fighting with their backs to the sea. If the perimeter collapses, and it could collapse any day, the war is over. South Korea will cease to exist. The United States will suffer its most humiliating military defeat since the founding of the nation. MacArthur's staff is focused on reinforcing Pusan. Send more troops, more supplies, more air support. Hold the line. That's the conventional thinking. But MacArthur isn't interested in conventional thinking. He's looking at a different part of the map. A port city on the western coast of Korea, about 200 miles behind enemy lines. A city that sits at the end of a narrow channel with 30-foot tides and treacherous currents. A city that every military expert says is impossible to assault from the sea. Inchon. MacArthur believes that if he can land forces at Inchon, he can cut the North Korean supply lines, retake Seoul, and trap the entire North Korean army between two forces, the Inchon landing force and the troops breaking out from Pusan. One bold stroke could end the war. But first, he has to convince everyone that the impossible is actually possible. And right now, nobody believes him. Welcome to the story of the Inchon landing, the most audacious, most improbable, and most successful amphibious operation since D-Day. The operation that every expert said would fail. The operation that saved South Korea and changed the course of the Korean War. And the operation that proved Douglas MacArthur was either a military genius or completely insane. Maybe both. Let me set the stage. It's late August 1950. The Korean War has been going for 2 months. The North Korean invasion caught everyone by surprise. The South Korean army collapsed almost immediately. American forces rushed from Japan were undermanned and under-equipped. For 2 months it's been one continuous retreat down the Korean peninsula. Task Force Smith destroyed. The 24th Division mauled. The 25th Division pushed back. Every defensive line broken. Every position abandoned. By early August, UN forces are compressed into the Pusan Perimeter, a roughly rectangular defensive area in the southeastern corner of Korea. It's about 50 miles by 80 miles. The Naktung River forms the western boundary. Mountains form the eastern boundary. Behind them is the port of Pusan and the sea. There's nowhere else to retreat. This is the last stand. General Walton Walker, commanding the 8th Army at Pusan, has given his famous stand or die order. No more retreating. The troops understand what this means. Hold the line or die trying. Because if the line breaks, there's no evacuation plan that will save them. They'll be trapped and destroyed. The North Koreans know this too. They're throwing everything they have at the perimeter, wave after wave of attacks. The battles at the Naktung Bulge, the fighting near Tagu, continuous pressure everywhere. UN forces are taking heavy casualties. They're running low on ammunition and supplies in some sectors. The situation is critical. And everyone knows that the North Koreans are preparing for one massive final offensive that could break the perimeter. Back in Washington, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are increasingly worried. They're sending reinforcements, the 1st Marine Division, the 2nd Infantry Division, additional Air Force units. But reinforcements take time. Ships have to sail from the United States. Troops have to be assembled and transported. Meanwhile, the perimeter could fall any day. What's needed is something dramatic, something that changes the entire strategic situation. Not just more troops to hold Pusan, but an operation that takes the pressure off Pusan entirely. MacArthur has been thinking about this since July. He studied the maps obsessively. Where can you land behind enemy lines that would have maximum strategic impact? There are several possible locations. Kunsan on the southwestern coast. Possible, but it's too far from Seoul and the main North Korean supply routes. Wonsan on the eastern coast. Possible, but it doesn't cut the main supply lines feeding the North Korean forces at Pusan. Chinampo near Pyongyang. Too far north, too risky. But Inchon. Inchon is perfect. It's the port for Seoul, only about 20 miles from the capital. Seoul is the transportation hub of Korea. All the major roads and rail lines run through it. If you take Inchon and Seoul, you cut every supply line feeding the North Korean army at Pusan. You trap them. They either retreat north and abandon their equipment, or they stay and get destroyed between the anvil of Pusan and the hammer of Inchon. It's brilliant strategy. There's just one problem. Inchon is a scent. Let me explain why every naval expert said Inchon couldn't be done. The problems aren't just difficult. They're each individually almost insurmountable. Together, they make Inchon look like military suicide. Problem 1. The tides. Inchon has some of the most extreme tidal variations in the world. The difference between high tide and low tide is over 30 feet. That's a 3-story building. At high tide, there's enough water for ships to approach the harbor. At low tide, the entire harbor becomes a vast mud flat extending miles from shore. Ships attempting to approach at low tide would run aground miles from their objective and sit there helpless until the tide came back in, 12 hours later. This means you have maybe 2 to 3 hours at high tide when an amphibious assault is even possible. Miss that window and your ships are stranded. And the tides are severe enough that you can only attempt a landing on certain days when the tide is high enough. In September 1950, there are only 3 days where the tide is adequate. September 15th, October 11th, and November 3rd. 3 days. 3 narrow windows. That's it. Problem 2. The approach. The channel leading to Inchon is narrow and winding. It's called Flying Fish Channel. It's only about half a mile wide in places, and it snakes through mudflats and rocks. One ship running aground could block the entire channel. And remember, you're doing this at high tide with strong currents. Navigation has to be perfect. One mistake and the entire invasion fleet is stuck. Problem 3. The seawalls. Inchon is a port city built for commercial shipping. The waterfront has 15-foot-high stone seawalls. These aren't beaches where you can drive landing craft onto sand. These are vertical walls. Marines would have to climb them under fire using ladders. Imagine storming a medieval castle, except the defenders have machine guns. That's what assaulting the Inchon seawalls would be like. Problem 4. Walmidu Island. There's a fortified island called Walmidu sitting in the harbor that commands the entire landing area. North Korean forces on that island can fire down on any landing craft approaching Inchon. You have to take Walmidu first, but Walmidu is connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway, so the North Koreans can reinforce it. And it's heavily fortified with bunkers and artillery. Taking it would be a battle all by itself. Problem 5. Timing. Because of the tides, you can't land reinforcements continuously like you could at Normandy. You land at high tide. Then the tide goes out. For 12 hours, your forces on shore are on their own. No reinforcements, limited resupply, no ability to evacuate wounded. If the North Koreans counterattack during low tide, you're stuck. You either hold with what you've got or you die. Problem 6. Surprise. Inchon is so obviously the logical place to land that the North Koreans must be expecting it. They'll have fortified the harbor, mined the approaches, prepositioned forces for counterattack. The element of surprise seems impossible, and amphibious assaults without surprise are usually disasters. Look at Gallipoli in World War I. These aren't minor obstacles. Each one is a potential mission killer. Together, they make Inchon look insane. August 23, 1950. A crucial meeting happens in Tokyo. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have sent a delegation to hear MacArthur's plan in person. This is the moment. Either MacArthur convinces them or Inchon dies. Present at the meeting, Army Chief of Staff General J. Lawton Collins, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Forrest Sherman, Air Force Vice Chief of Staff General Idwell Edwards, and various other senior officers. They're here to evaluate whether Inchon is militarily feasible or whether MacArthur has lost his mind. MacArthur knows this is his last chance. If he can't convince them today, they'll veto the operation. So he prepares the most important presentation of his career. For 90 minutes, he lays out his case. And by all accounts, it's one of the most impressive performances any of them had ever witnessed. He starts by acknowledging the risks. He doesn't minimize them. Yes, Inchon is difficult. Yes, the obstacles are severe. He lists every problem the Navy has raised. The tides, the seawalls, the narrow channel. He agrees these are legitimate concerns. But then he pivots. These same obstacles are why the North Koreans won't expect an attack at Inchon. They'll be looking at Kunsan or other more accessible ports. Inchon will be lightly defended because they think it's impossible to assault. He talks strategy. The Pusan Perimeter can't hold indefinitely. Even with reinforcements, it's a defensive battle of attrition. The North Koreans are getting stronger, bringing up more troops and supplies. Eventually, they'll break through. Or if they don't break through, UN forces will be stuck in a prolonged stalemate that bleeds resources and accomplishes nothing. Inchon changes everything. It's not just another battle, it's a war-winning operation. Then MacArthur delivers his final argument. He says, "I can almost hear the ticking of the second hand of destiny. We must act now or we will die. Inchon will succeed, and it will save our army from destruction." He pauses. "I realize that Inchon is a 5,000 to 1 shot, but I also know that if it succeeds, we will save 100,000 lives and end the war. I am ready to take that chance." The room remains silent. Then Collins asks about specific tactical plans. MacArthur's staff provides answers. Slowly, the mood shifts. The Joint Chiefs aren't enthusiastic, but they're starting to believe it might be possible. Within days, formal approval comes. Operation Chromite is authorized. Target date, September 15th. MacArthur has less than 3 weeks to put together one of the most difficult amphibious operations in military history. The moment approval comes through, planning becomes frantic. 3 weeks. Most amphibious operations take months to plan. D-Day took over a year. Inchon gets 3 weeks. Everything has to come together perfectly. First problem, forces. The 1st Marine Division will make the landing. But the division is scattered, some at Camp Pendleton, others already fighting at Pusan. Major General Oliver Smith has to assemble, equip, and transport his division in 3 weeks. It seems impossible, but Smith is a professional. He focuses on making it work. The Navy faces similar challenges. Admiral Doyle needs landing ships, transport ships, destroyers, cruisers, minesweepers. Over 200 vessels. Ships are pulled from all over the Pacific. Every crew needs briefing on the unique challenges of Inchon's tides and approaches. Intelligence is critical. What are the North Korean defenses? Navy Lieutenant Eugene Clark volunteers to infiltrate Inchon Harbor. He and a small team hide on Walmidu Island in early September, observing and mapping defenses. For over a week they operate under the North Koreans' noses. On September 14th, they'll light a signal fire marking the landing beaches. The intelligence is reassuring. Inchon isn't heavily defended. Maybe a few thousand troops. The North Koreans don't expect an attack. MacArthur was right. The operation has 3 phases. Phase 1. Take Walmidu Island during morning high tide. Phase 2. Land the main force at Inchon during evening high tide. Phase 3. Advance inland, take Kimpo Airfield, then Seoul. Timing is everything. Morning tide at 6:30 a.m., evening tide at 5:30 p.m. 2 narrow windows to change the war. With less than 2 weeks before D-Day, the Marines conduct rehearsal landings. They can't practice at Inchon, obviously, so they find similar terrain in Japan. They practice scaling walls. They practice loading and unloading from landing craft under time pressure. They practice coordinating naval gunfire support. Everything that can be rehearsed is rehearsed. But rehearsals aren't combat. Everyone knows that. Private First Class Fred Davidson, a rifleman in the 5th Marines, later described the mood during training. He said everyone was nervous. They'd heard about the tides, the seawalls, the narrow time windows. They knew this was different from anything the Marines had done before. Some of the older veterans compared it to Tarawa in World War II, another difficult amphibious assault with high casualties. That comparison didn't help morale. The officers tried to project confidence. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Murray, commanding the 5th Marines, told his men that they'd trained for this. They were ready. The Navy would soften up the defenses with bombardment. Airstrikes would neutralize enemy positions. By the time the Marines hit the beaches, the hard work would already be done. They just had to get ashore, secure the objectives, and hold. But privately, even the officers were worried. General Smith confided to his staff that there were too many things that could go wrong. The tides could be off. The channel navigation could fail. The North Koreans could have more forces than intelligence suggested. Any number of factors could turn Inchon into a disaster. But orders were orders. They'd do their job and trust that MacArthur's vision was correct. MacArthur himself was supremely confident. In the days before the invasion, he visited various units, giving speeches, projecting absolute certainty that Inchon would succeed. Some thought his confidence was justified by his military genius. Others thought it was arrogance. But everyone agreed. MacArthur believed completely in Inchon, and that confidence, whether justified or not, was contagious. By early September, the fleet begins assembling at sea. Over 260 ships converging on the waters off Inchon. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, landing ships, transports, supply vessels. It's an armada. Sailors aboard these ships have mixed feelings. Some are excited. This is a major operation, the kind that makes history. Others are nervous. They've heard about the tides and the narrow channel. One mistake and this becomes a disaster. The naval bombardment plan is extensive. Before the Marines land, the Navy will hammer Walmedu and Inchon with everything they have. 6-inch, 8-inch, and 16-inch guns from cruisers and battleships. 5-inch guns from destroyers. Aircraft dropping bombs and napalm. The objective is to suppress enemy defenses, destroy fortifications, and create chaos among the North Korean defenders. On September 10th, the preliminary bombardment begins. Cruisers move into range of Walmedu and open fire. The island is small, only about 1 square mile, and the Navy proceeds to pound every square foot of it. Explosions tear through the North Korean positions. Buildings collapse. Bunkers are damaged. The bombardment continues for days. The North Koreans on Walmedu try to respond. They have coastal artillery on the island. They fire back at the ships. A few shells hit, causing minor damage, but the North Korean fire is sporadic and ineffective. The U.S. Navy has overwhelming firepower and they use it. By September 14th, Walmedu is thoroughly worked over. Intelligence estimates suggest the defenses are severely weakened, but nobody knows for sure. The first Marines to land will find out. Final briefings happen on September 14th. Officers gather their men and go over the plan one more time. Everyone knows their objective. Everyone knows the timing. The mood is tense but focused. These are professional soldiers. They've trained for this. Now it's time to execute. That evening, the fleet moves into position. Ships navigate carefully through Flying Fish Channel. The destroyers lead, marking the safe path. The larger ships follow. It's nerve-wracking. One ship running aground could block the entire invasion fleet, but the Navy navigates perfectly. By midnight, the fleet is positioned off Inchon, ready for the morning assault. Aboard the command ship, MacArthur watches from the bridge. He's 70 years old. He could have stayed in Tokyo and monitored the operation from there, but that's not his style. He's here with the fleet to witness his greatest gamble. If Inchon succeeds, it validates everything he's argued for. If it fails, his career ends in disaster. But MacArthur doesn't seem worried. He's confident, almost serene. He believes destiny is on his side. The Marines aboard the landing ships try to sleep, but most can't. Too much adrenaline, too much anticipation. They check their equipment repeatedly, load and unload their weep. September 15th, 1950. Dawn breaks over Inchon Harbor. At 5:45 a.m., the naval bombardment intensifies. Every ship in range opens fire on Walmedu. The noise is overwhelming. Shells scream overhead. Explosions tear through the island. This is the final prep before the Marines land. The objective: suppress any remaining defenses so the landing force can get ashore with minimal casualties. At 6:15 a.m., the landing craft carrying the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines head toward Green Beach on Walmedew. This is it, the first wave. If this fails, the entire operation could unravel. The Marines in those boats are tense. They can see the island ahead through the smoke and dust from the bombardment. It looks devastated, but they know the North Koreans have had days to dig in. Some of them are still alive and waiting. 6:33 a.m. the first landing craft hit Green Beach. The ramps drop. Marines pour out, expecting heavy fire, and there's almost nothing. A few scattered shots from North Korean positions that survived the bombardment, but nothing like the intense resistance they feared. The bombardment worked. The North Korean defenses on Walmedew are shattered. The Marines move inland quickly. They've been trained for urban combat, fighting through rubble and destroyed buildings. Walmedew is a mess, craters everywhere, buildings collapsed, debris blocking streets. But the North Koreans are disorganized, stunned by the bombardment. Small firefights erupt as Marines clear bunkers and trenches, but there's no coordinated defense. Within 45 minutes, the Marines have secured most of the island. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Taplett, commanding the 3rd Battalion, can't believe how smoothly it's going. He'd expected heavy casualties, desperate fighting. Instead, his Marines are moving through the objectives faster than planned. By 7:50 a.m., just over an hour after landing, Walmedew is secure. The American flag is raised on Radio Hill, the highest point on the island. Total Marine casualties: 14 wounded, 0 killed. It's almost too easy. But there's no time to celebrate. The tide is already starting to go out. The Marines on Walmedew are now isolated. The causeway connecting the island to the mainland is exposed as the water recedes. If the North Koreans counterattack across that causeway, it could be trouble. But artillery from the ships offshore covers the causeway. Any North Korean troops trying to approach would be torn apart. So the Marines dig in and wait for the evening high tide when the main landing will happen at Inchon proper. Back on the command ship, MacArthur watches the Walmedew assault through binoculars. When word comes that the island is secure with minimal casualties, he allows himself a smile. The first phase worked, but he knows the hard part is still ahead. Inchon itself is a much bigger objective. More North Korean troops, higher seawalls, more things that can go wrong. Walmedew's success doesn't guarantee Inchon's success, but it's a good start. The morning drags on. From 6:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., 11 hours, the invasion fleet sits offshore waiting for the tide to come back in. It's surreal. The Marines on Walmedew can see Inchon across the mudflats. The city is right there, but the water's too low. They can't advance. They just wait. During these hours, the Navy uses the time to continue bombardment of Inchon. Cruisers and destroyers pound the waterfront. Aircraft from carriers make repeated strikes, dropping bombs and napalm. The objective is to keep the North Korean defenders suppressed, to prevent them from organizing a coordinated defense. Smoke rises from dozens of fires throughout the city. From offshore, Inchon looks like it's being destroyed. Intelligence reports suggest the North Koreans are confused. They didn't expect an attack at Inchon. The Walmedew assault took them by surprise. Now, watching the massive fleet offshore and the continuous bombardment, they're trying to figure out what's happening. Are the Americans actually going to attempt a landing at high tide in the evening? Some North Korean commanders start moving reinforcements toward Inchon. Others assume it's a feint and that the real landing will happen elsewhere. The confusion is exactly what MacArthur wanted. Aboard the landing ships offshore, the Marines prepare for the evening assault. They've been watching the bombardment all day. Some are relieved, surely nothing can survive that kind of pounding. Others are skeptical. You can't kill everyone with artillery and someone will still be shooting when they hit the beaches. They check their equipment again, load their weapons, apply camouflage paint, get their minds ready for combat. The officers brief their men one final time. Red Beach, the northern landing site, has a 15-foot seawall that must be scaled. Blue Beach, the southern site, has lower walls but might have more defenders. Each Marine knows which be. 5:17 p.m. The first wave of landing craft heads toward Red Beach. The 5th Marines are going in. Behind them, more waves are forming up. Blue Beach will be hit simultaneously by the 1st Marines. This is the coordinated assault. 2 beaches, thousands of Marines, all converging on Inchon at once. As the landing craft approach Red Beach, the Marines can see the seawall ahead. It's high, higher than it looked in photographs. 15 feet of stone rising straight up from the water, and they're supposed to climb it under fire. Some Marines are carrying scaling ladders, aluminum ladders they'll prop against the wall. Others have ropes and grappling hooks. It's medieval siege warfare with modern weapons. The naval bombardment lifts as the landing craft get close. Can't risk hitting friendly forces. That means there's a brief window, maybe 30 seconds, when the bombardment stops and the Marines aren't ashore yet. That's when the North Korean defenders can pop up and start shooting. And they do. Machine gun fire opens up from positions along the seawall. Mortars start dropping shells among the landing craft. 5:33 p.m. The first landing craft hit Red Beach. The ramps drop. Marines pour out into waist-deep water and rush toward the seawall. Bullets are snapping overhead. Men go down. Others keep moving. There's no cover. They're completely exposed until they reach the base of the wall. Those first seconds are chaos and terror. Staff Sergeant Forrest Jones is in one of the first boats. He later described it as the longest 30 seconds of his life, running through the water while machine guns fire at you, seeing the wall ahead knowing you have to climb it, hearing men scream when they're hit. He makes it to the wall, slams against it, catches his breath. Now he has to climb. The Marines prop ladders against the seawall, start climbing. It's awkward, wearing full combat gear, carrying weapons, trying to climb a ladder while people shoot at you. Some ladders break, some Marines fall, but others make it to the top. As soon as the 1st Marines get over the seawall, they start suppressing the North Korean positions, throwing grenades, firing at defenders, creating space for more Marines to climb. Within minutes, dozens of Marines are over the wall and pushing inland. More landing craft arrive. More Marines climb. The seawall that seemed like an impossible obstacle is overcome through sheer aggressive action. Not elegant, not easy, but effective. By 5:50 p.m., Red Beach is secured. Marines are moving into the city, clearing buildings, securing the immediate area. Blue Beach to the south has its own drama. The 1st Marines hit at 5:30 p.m. as planned. Blue Beach has lower seawalls but more North Korean defenders in the area. The fighting is intense. North Korean troops fire from buildings overlooking the beach. Mortars drop shells on the landing craft. The Marines take casualties but keep coming, wave after wave. You can't stop a Marine assault by killing a few Marines. You have to kill all of them, and there are thousands of them. Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez leads a platoon toward a North Korean bunker that's pouring fire into the Marines. He's carrying a grenade. As he approaches the bunker, he's shot and falls near the entrance. Wounded, knowing he can't throw the grenade, he falls on it with his body to shield his men from the explosion. The grenade detonates. Lopez dies instantly. His men, saved by his sacrifice, take the bunker. Lopez is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. That's the kind of fighting happening all along Blue Beach. Individual acts of courage. Small unit actions that don't make the big picture reports but determine whether the landing succeeds or fails. Marines clearing bunkers one by one, fighting through streets and buildings, taking casualties but never stopping. By 6 p.m., both Red Beach and Blue Beach are secured. The Marines are ashore and pushing inland. The beachhead is established. MacArthur's gamble is working. The impossible landing at Inchon is actually happening. But now comes the next challenge, holding the beachhead and expanding it before the tide goes out again. Remember the tide. That's always the constraint. At 11 p.m., the water will recede again. For the next 12 hours, no reinforcements or heavy equipment can come ashore. The Marines have to secure enough ground during high tide to be defensible during low tide. That means taking key objectives quickly. The Marines push into Inchon aggressively. They're fighting North Korean troops who are trying to organize a defense but are hampered by confusion and the chaos of the bombardment. Some North Korean units fight hard, others retreat or surrender. The city is a maze of streets and buildings, and the fighting is close range and intense. By 8 p.m., the Marines have secured most of the waterfront area and are pushing deeper into the city. Tank landing ships, LSDS, are c. September 16, 1950. Dawn breaks over Inchon. The Marines have held through the night. North Korean attempts to counterattack during the low tide hours failed. Now, with the morning high tide, reinforcements are pouring ashore. The 7th Infantry Division begins landing. More tanks, more artillery. The beachhead that was precarious yesterday is now solid. MacArthur himself comes ashore around noon. At 70 years old, he wades through the water onto Red Beach. It's pure theater. Photographers are everywhere capturing the moment. MacArthur knows the value of these images. They'll be on front pages across America, showing that the Supreme Commander shares the risks with his troops. But it's also genuine. MacArthur wanted to see Inchon for himself, to witness the success of his vision. He tours the captured areas, talks to Marines, inspects the seawalls they climbed under fire. Everywhere he goes, troops gather to see him. Some are genuinely inspired. Others are cynical, easy to come ashore after the fighting's done. But nobody questions that MacArthur's plan worked. The impossible happened. Inchon is theirs. The next objective is Kimpo Airfield, about 10 miles inland. Kimpo is critical. It's the best airfield near Seoul. If UN forces can take it, they can base aircraft there for close air support and resupply. The Marines start advancing toward Kimpo on September 16th. The North Koreans try to stop them, establishing defensive positions along the roads and in villages. But the Marines have momentum now. They have tanks, artillery, air support. The North Korean defenses are overrun systematically. September 17th, the Marines reach Kimpo. There's a brief fight for the airfield. North Korean troops try to hold it, but they're overwhelmed. By evening, Kimpo is in UN hands. Engineers immediately start repairing the runways. Within 24 hours, American aircraft are landing at Kimpo, operating just a few miles from Seoul. The speed of the advance is remarkable. Now the Marines and Army units turn toward Seoul itself. This is the ultimate objective. Seoul is the capital, the transportation hub, the political and symbolic heart of Korea. If Seoul falls, North Korean morale will collapse. More importantly, taking Seoul cuts every major supply line feeding the North Korean army fighting at Pusan. That army, over 100,000 troops, will be trapped. But Seoul won't fall easily. It's a city of over 1 million people. The North Koreans have had time to prepare defenses. They've fortified key buildings, placed artillery on commanding heights, and positioned troops throughout the city. This will be urban warfare, the most difficult kind of fighting, house to house, street by street, costly and slow. The battle for Seoul begins on September 20th. The Marines attack from the west. The 7th Infantry Division attacks from the south. The plan is to encircle the city, cut it off, then squeeze the North Korean defenders until they collapse or surrender. But the North Koreans fight hard. They know losing Seoul means losing the war. The fighting is brutal. North Korean troops defend buildings until they're destroyed. Then they fall back to the next building and defend that. American forces use tanks to blast through obstacles, but tanks are vulnerable in cities. North Korean troops with anti-tank weapons can hide anywhere. Every block is a battle. Every building is potentially fortified. Private First Class Walter Mongan is part of the 1st Marines fighting through Seoul. He later described it as the scariest combat he experienced. You couldn't see the enemy most of the time. They'd be in windows, on rooftops, behind walls. You take fire from multiple directions. Grenades would come flying out of buildings. You never knew where the next threat was coming from. His squad took casualties every day, sometimes multiple times a day. The North Korean defense is determined but ultimately hopeless. They're surrounded. They have no reinforcements coming, no resupply. Every day they fight, more of them die or are captured. But they keep fighting anyway, either out of loyalty, fear of what happens if they surrender, or simple military discipline. One of the key battles happens at Seoul's main hill positions. The North Koreans have artillery and observation posts on several hills overlooking the city. These positions can direct fire on American forces below. The hills have to be taken. The Marines assault them over several days. It's World War I-style combat, attacking uphill against fortified positions. Casualties mount. But slowly, methodically, the Marines take each hill. September 25th, the Marines reach the center of Seoul. The city is largely in ruins. Weeks of bombardment and street fighting have destroyed huge sections. Fires burn everywhere. Civilians who didn't evacuate are caught in the crossfire. It's a humanitarian disaster and a military necessity happening simultaneously. While Marines and 7th Infantry fought for Seoul, something even more dramatic happened in the south. The Pusan Perimeter, under siege for 6 weeks, erupted. On September 16th, day after Inchon landing, General Walker ordered 8th Army to break out and go offensive. This was MacArthur's plan. Inchon was the hammer, Pusan was the anvil. North Korean army caught between them would be crushed, and that's what happened, though not without hard fighting. North Korean forces at Pusan were in difficult position. They'd been attacking for weeks, taking heavy casualties, making minimal progress. Supply lines ran north through Seoul. When Inchon fell and Seoul was threatened, those lines were cut. Suddenly, the North Korean army had no resupply, no reinforcements, and UN forces attacking from both directions. Initial breakout was tough. North Koreans didn't collapse immediately. They fought defensive actions, trying to hold back long enough for main army to escape north. Some conducted effective rearguard actions, buying time at cost of their destruction. But momentum had shifted. By late September, North Korean army was disintegrating. Units that were cohesive became scattered groups trying to escape. Some headed north, others into mountains, hoping to conduct guerrilla operations. Many surrendered. The organized army that nearly conquered all South Korea in June was being destroyed. UN forces from Pusan and forces from Seoul met near Asan, where Task Force Smith was destroyed in July. Link-up happened September 26th. 2 forces joined, creating continuous line across southern Korea. North Korean army was trapped south of this line. Tens of thousands cut off. Over next weeks, many captured or killed trying to escape. Numbers tell the story. In June, North Korean People's Army had about 90,000 frontline troops. By early October, after Inchon and Pusan breakout, they'd suffered approximately 300,000 casualties, killed, wounded, captured, missing, shattered. Invasion force that nearly won was gone. MacArthur's strategy worked brilliantly. Inchon cut supply lines. Pusan breakout trapped the army. Combination destroyed North Korea's ability to continue war in South. One of most successful strategic operations in military history. 2 weeks from Inchon landing to effective destruction of North Korean army. Liberation of South Korea happened rapidly. UN forces swept north, retaking towns under occupation. South Korean civilians who suffered under communist rule welcomed liberators. Celebrations in streets, flags waving, people crying with relief. South Korea, on verge of extinction, was saved. MacArthur visited Seoul September 29th for ceremony restoring South Korean government. President Syngman Rhee returned to capital. MacArthur declared Seoul liberated. Moment of triumph. Impossible accomplished. War seemed effectively over. North Korea's army destroyed. South Korea free. All that remained was pushing north to finish the job. But this is where story takes darker turn, because Inchon's success created conditions for next disaster. MacArthur, convinced of his genius, would make decisions in coming weeks leading to catastrophe. Chinese intervention, retreat from Yalu, grinding stalemate lasting 2 more years. Inchon's success planted seeds of future failure. So why did Inchon work? How did an operation every expert said was impossible succeed so dramatically? First surprise. MacArthur was right. North Koreans wouldn't expect landing at Inchon. They thought it impossible too. Forces concentrated at Pusan. Inchon lightly defended, maybe 2,500 troops, mostly garrison units. If heavily fortified with tens of thousands, landing could have been disaster. Element of surprise was total. Second, overwhelming force. Once decision made, U.S. military committed massive resources, over 70,000 troops, over 260 ships, complete air superiority, naval gunfire from cruisers and battleships. When Marines hit beaches, they had enormous firepower supporting them. North Korean defenders simply overwhelmed. Third, the tides actually helped. Yes, they limited landing windows, but same tides made North Koreans complacent. They assumed no one would attempt landing under such difficult conditions. During low tide, Marines isolated, but so were North Koreans. Neither could easily reinforce. Static situation favored side with better firepower, Americans. Fourth, naval and air power. Bombardment before landing was devastating. Days shelling Walmidu, hours on Inchon proper. Defenses largely destroyed or suppressed before Marines landed. During fighting, naval gunfire always available. Any counterattack hit with shells from offshore. Air support continuous. North Koreans couldn't mass without being bombed. Fifth, Marine Corps excellence. Well-trained, well-equipped, highly motivated. Practiced amphibious operations. Knew how to scale seawalls, fight urban terrain, coordinate with support. When things went wrong, ladders breaking, casualties mounting, Marines adapted and kept forward. Operations succeeded partly because of planning, partly because of troop quality. Sixth, MacArthur's leadership. Say what you will about ego and flaws, and there were many, but insistence on Inchon was vindicated. Right about strategic value. Right about North Koreans not expecting it. Right that risks were acceptable given alternative. Lesser commander might have played safe, reinforced Pusan, accepted prolonged defensive battle. MacArthur gambled on war-winning operation and won. But acknowledge luck's role. If weather bad September 15th, landing postponed or canceled. If tides off even slightly, ships could ground. If North Koreans reinforced at last minute, casualties much higher. If Clark's reconnaissance discovered, North Koreans would have known. Any factors different could have turned triumph to disaster. Military historians argue whether Inchon was genius or recklessness. Both views have merit. High-risk operation that could have failed catastrophically, but also based on sound strategic logic and careful planning. MacArthur took calculated risk, not blind gamble. Understood obstacles and had plans to overcome them. That's leadership, even if also arrogance. Inchon changed how militaries think about amphibious operations. Proved that even in modern era, well-executed amphibious assault could succeed. Validated striking enemies' weak points rather than strength. Showed sometimes doing the unexpected, even seemingly impossible, is smartest strategy. But Inchon also reinforced MacArthur's worst tendencies: belief in own genius, willingness to ignore expert advice, conviction that bold action always works. These traits served well at Inchon. They'd nearly destroy him at Yalu River 2 months later. Success can be more dangerous than failure if it makes you overconfident. In immediate aftermath, MacArthur hailed as military genius. Press called it one of greatest operations in military history. President Truman sent congratulations. Congress talked about MacArthur as national hero, even talk of him running for president. Man under pressure weeks earlier was now celebrated as savior of South Korea. But success brought new questions. What now? Original UN mandate was repel invasion and restore South Korea. That accomplished. North Korean army destroyed. South Korea liberated. Mission complete. But North Korean regime still existed in Pyongyang. Should UN forces stop at 38th parallel, pre-war border, or push north and reunify Korea by force? MacArthur advocated pushing north. Argued stopping at 38th parallel would leave North Korea intact and able to invade again. Only way to secure lasting peace was destroy regime entirely. Reunify Korea under South Korean leadership. Remove communist threat permanently. Persuasive argument, especially after Inchon made anything seem possible. President Truman and Joint Chiefs more cautious, worried about Chinese and Soviet reactions. China made clear it wouldn't tolerate UN forces on its border. If American troops approached Yalu River, border between North Korea and China, Chinese might intervene. That could turn Korean War into World War III. Risks enormous. But MacArthur dismissed concerns, believed Chinese were bluffing, wouldn't risk war with United States. Even if they intervened, American air power would destroy them. He'd won at Inchon by ignoring experts. Now he'd win in North Korea same way. Trust his judgment. Take bold action. Victory within reach. Truman, riding high on Inchon success, gave permission to cross 38th parallel. UN forces authorized to push into North Korea with objective of destroying army and reunifying peninsula. Fateful decision. Within 2 months would lead to disaster. Early October, UN forces crossed into North Korea. Advance was rapid. North Korean forces, already shattered, offered minimal resistance. Pyongyang fell October 19th. UN troops pushed toward Yalu River. Victory seemed inevitable. Then late October, Chinese forces began crossing Yalu in massive numbers. Over 300,000 troops. They hit UN forces hard, catching them by surprise. MacArthur had been wrong. Chinese weren't bluffing, and American air power couldn't stop them in rugged Korean terrain. By late November, UN forces were in full retreat. The advance to Yalu became disaster. Chosin Reservoir, the long retreat south. By January 1951, UN forces were pushed back below Seoul. Everything won at Inchon was lost. War would drag on 2 more years, ending in stalemate roughly where it started. MacArthur wanted to expand the war, bomb China, use nationalist Chinese troops, maybe nuclear weapons. Truman said no. Disagreement became public. In April 1951, Truman fired MacArthur for insubordination. MacArthur's career ended not in triumph but in dismissal. Inchon remained his greatest achievement. Military academies still study it. It's taught as example of brilliant strategy and bold execution. But it's also taught alongside what came after, as warning about overconfidence, about ignoring intelligence, about believing your own genius. 70+ years later, why does Inchon matter? Why do we still talk about it? First, because it worked. Against overwhelming odds, despite every expert saying impossible, MacArthur pulled it off. That's inspiring. Reminds us that conventional wisdom isn't always right. Sometimes bold action, carefully planned and aggressively executed, can achieve what seems impossible. Second, because it saved South Korea. Without Inchon, Pusan Perimeter might have fallen. South Korea might have ceased to exist. Today's South Korea, prosperous, democratic, free, exists partly because of what happened September 15, 1950. That matters. Third, because it's a study in leadership. MacArthur's absolute conviction, his willingness to stake everything on his judgment, his ability to convince others to follow his vision, that's remarkable leadership. Even if flawed, even if it led to overconfidence later, in this moment it was exactly what was needed. Fourth, because of the men who executed it. Marines who climbed seawalls under fire. Sailors who navigated narrow channels perfectly. Soldiers who fought through Seoul street by street. They made it happen. The plan was brilliant, but execution required courage, skill, and determination. They delivered. Fifth, because it's great storytelling. 30-foot tides, seawalls to climb, narrow time windows, everything that could go wrong. And yet it worked. It's dramatic, suspenseful, triumphant. Human beings love stories where heroes overcome impossible odds. Inchon is that story. But also remember what came after. Inchon wasn't the end, it was the middle. Success led to overreach. Overreach led to disaster. Disaster led to stalemate. War that seemed won in September dragged on until July 1953. 36,000 Americans died in Korea. Over 1 million Koreans. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese. War ended roughly where it started. Inchon saved South Korea. But it didn't end the war, that's the lesson. Brilliant tactics can win battles, but winning battles doesn't necessarily win wars. Strategic objectives, political realities, enemy capabilities, all those matter too. Inchon succeeded as operation, but as strategy for ending the war it failed. Because war didn't end, it just changed.